It's, it's a chain of islands just kind of out there. They adopt most of China's writing system, a lot of the culture, and it's China light. But here you see them consciously saying, all right, we're going to import a Chinese style of central authority built around the place, the court system, as opposed to just bouncing around and making it so individualized to a single ruler. And that is one of a number of efforts where the court, the dynasty, tried to structure its power center in a consciously Chinese way and in a way that propagated itself. A big part of that was literature, using the written word to promote the government, to promote the culture, to promote the established powers. And those established powers largely with a Chinese stamp, a largely Buddhist and Confucianist stamp, and whenever possible, minimizing the Japanese, the authentic Japanese culture. The outlook for the culture was largely Chinese, and part of that found expression in the writing and collecting, largely. It's the editing of the Manyosho. The Manyosho it's really one of two of the oldest surviving anthologies that we have of Japanese poetry that is written largely in a classical Japanese language centered around the hot cultural centers like Kyoto. But the poetic forms, and in many cases the language itself, was heavily influenced by the Chinese examples. So they are producing art that mimics or borrows an awful lot of its style, an awful lot of its content, and an awful lot of its themes from China next door. The Manyosho, literally the collection of 10,000 leaves, is a significant undertaking of around 4,500 individual poems, generally varying lengths, but most of them fairly short. The longer form is called the choka. The shorter form is the tanka, which is just like 31 syllables, alternating lines of 5 syllables, 7 syllables, and 5 and 7 and 7, I think. Very tight, concise expressions. Prioritizing a kind of concision that really exists to this day. The tanka is the forerunner of the haiku, which just takes that short form and chisels it down even more to where you get very brief evocations of singular feelings, singular ideas, singular moments that just pack a punch and are then over. One of the idiosyncrasies of the Japanese poetic language is beyond the rigidity of the syllable structure. is the question of the language itself. It does not employ an awful, really any stress or pitch or length of the syllable like so many other languages. The rhyme, there is no rhyme generally. It makes it thoroughly about a kind of monotone rhythm that produces a somewhat hypnotic effect if you hear it in the original. We don't have that, of course, because we're dealing with translations. You can find online recordings of people reading this stuff. That is kind of neat to just Google and listen to it for a little bit. You can get a sense of a hypnotic effect. That is a great experiment to do with any poetry of any culture, just to get a sense of what they like listening to. Because remember, poetry, especially lyric poetry, they're basically songs. And if you look at them that way, it makes a lot more sense than, oh, I'm writing a poem. That's different. No, these are all largely songs. They can be sung out loud, they can be recited out loud, or they can just be read, but usually colored where you are singing it quietly to yourself. And that effect often carries a lot of the meaning. One of the other quirks of the Manyoshu is the scope of the poets. We have in this, among the 4,500 poems, several from emperors and empresses. Whether or not they were actually written by those people is another question, but they get credit. And, how many world leaders today actually write the books that come out under their name? You just give them credit. Certainly, some of them are going to be more heavy-handed in their authorship than others, but the question is largely silly. If it is an emanation from the office of the head of state, you have to treat it as such. And here you have poems coming from these people. But it's not just that. You also get a remarkable collection of poets or poems from lesser officials within the court system. You don't get a broad socioeconomic spread here beyond, the very rich to the comfortably middle class, the underclass, as it were. They're not reading a lot of poetry anyway. This isn't for them. This is a very rarefied, court-centered culture. If you're working in rice fields all day, this isn't for you. But you do get some scope of social elevation, which is interesting. You also get, I think significantly, some women in here, some female poets, including empresses, giving just another little voice to the chorus that's out there. And, that is not all that common in world history, world culture at this time. Take a look at the first one in our collection, which is only the second one in the anthology. The first one was also by an emperor. But this one is Emperor Jomei, the poem composed by the emperor when he ascended Mount Kagu and viewed the land. In Yamato, there are crowds of mountains, but our rampart is heavenly Mount Kagu. When I climb it and look out across the land, over the land plain, smoke rises and rises over the sea plain. Seagulls rise and rise. A fair land it is, Dragonfly Island, the land of Yamato. Huh. Interesting, you know. But what's he doing here? What is the purpose of this poem? If it is an emperor, he's a busy guy. He's got things to do. Is he just noodling around and saying, I'm going to write a poem about that mountain over there? What does this poem do? In Yamato, there are crowds of mountains, but our rampart is heavenly Mount Kagu. Ours is special. We're associated with the special one. Therefore, we are special too. We're not one of the crowd, we are an elite. Remember who is reading this? Not the rice farmers, the elite. But this stands for the entire civilization, supposedly, who is very comfortable with the idea of being elite. When I climb it and look out across the land, look out across the land. This is significant. Viewing the land, as we are told in the little introductory line up top, viewing the land is a tradition among emperors. In many cultures, but in particular in Japan, it was considered a significant part of an emperor's duties, to go out and look at the land. It's almost like he's blessing it by looking at it. You gratify someone by looking at them. If somebody is not important, you ignore them. But, and again, here's a little elitism moment. Here the emperor is saying, I am going out and I'm looking out on the land, and that honors the land and reflects well upon me. So there's that. It has a political purpose. Over the land plain, smoke rises and rises. Over the sea plain, seagulls rise and rise. Gee, isn't it nice when everything's going up instead of just the price of gas? Everything's looking up. Everything's coming up roses with me. Makes a nice political slogan almost. Is he running for this office? I thought you were born into it. What's going on? A fair land it is. Dragonfly Island, the land of Yamato. I love that declarative sentence at the end. A fair land it is. Yes?
I believe that he's trying to say that when it's there, it's the cause of everything rising up. But
yeah.
His present is positive.
Yeah.
So if he's running for for office, that would be a great law saying that with me everything is great.
Yeah. Kind of sounds like what? That we've read. Perhaps the first week here. Him to Aten. With me, everything's fan-damn-tastic. You have nothing to complain about. Everything's looking up. Everything's coming up roses. With me. So this harmless little poem about looking at a mountain and saying, aw, has a little edge to it, has a little purpose, has a little agenda. Yeah.
And by saying there are a crowd of mountain, but this one is the one.
Yeah.
He's making it personal, intimate.
Who is not the special one then? Who is he talking about when he's talking about that crowds of mountains? or those crowds. I don't think he's talking just about mountains at this point.
Other villages, other people surrounding that area. It's like you're the chosen ones.
Yeah. I would say also the ugly word for it is propaganda, quite frankly. You know, there's some nice imagery in there, certainly great concision of expression. So there is some distinct art going on there. But recognizing that art can have a specific political agenda that you should be aware of, that's part of just being a smart person these days. You can like propaganda. Some propaganda is quite artful. Some propaganda is just masterpieces. And we saw an awful lot of it in the ancient era. I can appreciate the art of it, but I understand also that the art is in service to a political motive. And that doesn't ruin my experience of the art, but it just puts me on my guard a little bit. And I think that's where reading this kind of stuff today is particularly helpful, because we are inundated with text in a neutral term, propaganda in another, 24 hours a day. So having some experience of picking through it and saying, all right, you know, I see the game you're trying to play with me there, but you know, it doesn't mean you're not fun. That just makes you a serious and critical citizen of the world, which I think is where we all kind of want to land ultimately. But look at the next one, Princess Nakuta. Princess, female, yeah, significant poet here. She has, I believe, 13 poems in total out of 4,500. Not in this excerpt, but out of the total. But what she does has the political element in there. But she's also working with some significant, I would say, notions of art. When spring comes forth that lay in hiding all the winter through, the birds that did not sing come back and sing to us once more. The flowers that did not bloom have blossomed everywhere again, yet so rife the hills we cannot make our way to pick, and so deep the grass we cannot pluck the flowers to see. But when on autumn hills we gaze upon the leaves of trees, it is the yellow ones we pluck and marvel for sheer joy, and the ones still green, sighing, leave upon the boughs. Those are the ones I hate to lose. For me, it is the autumn hills. She's going way out on a limb, pardon the pun, and saying that autumn is nice. Spring is nice, but autumn, that's just for me. Sweaters, hot cocoa, apple cider donuts. What's not to like? But that can't be it. Something else might be going on there. When spring comes forth that lay in hiding all the winter through, the birds that did not sing come back and sing to us once more. Birds, nature. Okay, we're into nature here. Interesting. The flowers that did not bloom have blossomed everywhere again. More nature. Yet, nice little turn there. Yet, so rife the hills we cannot make our way to pick, and so deep the grass we cannot pluck the flowers to see. What is the problem she has with spring? You can't take a walk in it. It's unusable. It looks pretty from a distance, but it has no utility. You know, spring comes back, and unless you're really quick with the mower, pretty soon it's just an explosion of wildlife out there. Plant life especially, perhaps. And it's very difficult to trudge your way through. Okay, that's getting a little bit more specific. Filling out why she likes spring, but, not the favorite. We gaze upon the leaves of trees. It is the yellow ones we pluck in autumn. So in autumn, you can walk up to a tree and pluck a leaf. It's not so overgrown, not so impenetrable. You can go through and hey, pretty leaf. Yellow leaves are preferred to green ones because, well, in autumn, the leaves have changed color. They have winnowed down to just a few, and you can make use of them. It is the yellow ones we pluck and marvel for sheer joy, and the ones still green, sighing, leave upon the boughs. Those are the ones I hate to lose. For me, it is the autumn hills. Here it helps to have a loose framework of association with Buddhism, which we didn't get into terribly much in ancient China or India, but the basics. In Buddhism, you practice a kind of non-attachment to the world. You are okay with the idea of death. Reincarnation is kind of a thing. So, okay, I'll die. I'm not going to get too attached to the things of this world. I'm not going to be too worldly in my outlook, too materialistic in my desires, that, death is going to be that big of a deal. So that almost predilection for death, you can see going on here. Fall is death. Autumn is death. Fall is death makes you sound like you're going to slip and fall and break your neck. So that idea of change and transition from one to the other is there as well. Another central tenet of Buddhism. Nothing stays the same, all things are in flux. But also remember politically, when the Nara court starts importing undiluted Chinese culture, of which Buddhism is a piece, it is somewhat displacing more native indigenous belief systems like Shinto. The Shinto belief system is largely about, I don't want to say anything that specific, but animism, the belief of the spirits in all life, including vegetable life, flowers, trees, and the like. That is a core tenet. So if her problem is with in spring, there's just too much out there, you need some death to weed it all out and make it manageable. The profusion of spring is just overwhelming and unusable. She is saying that, well, okay, that's not as good as a time that is whittled down in its life. A time that incorporates a principle of death. A time that is more manageable, more workable, more utilitarian, like a Chinese Buddhist-influenced government. So you see, you can always find these little hidden agendas in there, even in a poem that is so radical, it takes the wildly controversial belief that autumn leaves are pretty. Oh, there's got to be an agenda there somewhere. But there is. You can dispel that idea and say that, well, you're just reading into it too much, that's just silly. It's just a really very pretty poem about fall foliage. You know, it should be printed maybe on a poster with good color pictures of mountains from, let's say, New Hampshire in the fall, when it's just so perfect and an explosion of color. That's what that should be. It's just a pretty poem. Yes, it is. But there is that other effect in there that doesn't ruin our appreciation of the beauty, of the simple imagery going on here. But it qualifies it and gives us one other thing to be aware of. Now, the big dog of this collection of the Manyosho is Kakenomoto no Hitomaru. And I apologize to anybody offended by my butchering of names. I'm going to do that a lot. He is probably the most prominent poet of the collection, generally heralded as one of the two most artistically significant in the collection. A poet with a deep sense of the heritage he had inherited in Japanese culture and poetry, and the role that a poet can carve out for himself within that tradition. And so you get this poetry that is at once very public and very political in its ways, but also remarkably personal. So that he sets those two realms, the personal and the public, not necessarily against one another, but intertwined. And you can read it so that they could be at odds with one another. But I think that ultimately cheapens it. But if you see how reflecting on one meaning, let's say the public, perhaps calls to mind other associations that the personal reading of it could do, I think that's a little bit more significant, because that can lead to all sorts of nuances about what he isn't putting down on paper, but is still somehow expressing through that tension of the public and personal. Anyway, take a look at the first one we have here. From that hallowed age, when the monarch suzerain of the sun reigned at Kashihara by Unebi, called the Jewel Sash Mount, each and every god made manifest in the world of men, one by one in evergreen succession, like a line of hemlock trees, ruled under heaven all this realm with uncontested sway. Very majestic, very soaring, very important. Talking about the significance of the past, of a kind of ancestor worship that is in its way very Chinese, with its traditions of filial piety. Yet, there's that word again, yet, from sky seen Yamato did one depart, whatever may have been the secret of his sage intent, and passed across the slopes of blue earth Nara Mountain to a land remote beyond the distant heaven, the land of Omi, where water dashes on the rocks to the palace of Otsu in Sasanami of the gently lapping waves. And there, as it is said, he ruled this realm beneath the sky, that sovereign god, august ancestral deity. His great palace stood upon this spot, as I have heard. Its mighty halls rose here, so all men say, where now spring grasses choke the earth in their ripe growth, and the mists rise up to hide the dazzling springtime sun. Now I view this site, where once the mighty palace stood, and it is sad to see. And then it is followed by these two little tagline poems. These are called tanka. The original, the poem that we just went through was, of course, a choka, a long poem. Here, the tanka is a kind of summation at the end. It'll restate, it'll augment, it'll clarify, it will sometimes critique, but it's just one more bite at the apple at the very end to give you another perspective, another little nudge of meaning. Still Cape Caris sands, by Shiga of the gently lapping waves, changeless from of old, but it will wait in vain to see the courtiers' boats row back. Broad the waters stand by Shiga of the gently lapping waves, the lake is still, but how can it ever meet again the men of long ago? What is going on with this poem? Yeah. He is walking by ruins. And this is a not uncommon poetic inspiration where somebody walks by ruins and says, this used to be something. This used to be something important. What is it ruins of? A palace, yeah. We get a nice little story. One that is sort of historically accurate. Someone set up a different court in a different city, and there was a political struggle between them. So here is Kakenomoto coming along and saying, I remember that guy. He went and took the power away, and that really sucked. But now we got it back, and everything's good again, and look at what he left. And what he left is the ruins of his palace. So when the poet is looking at these ruins, he's saying, okay, well, this is what happens. The suggestion is that this is strictly a partisan exercise where he's saying, you tried to do something you shouldn't have done, and this is what happens. You get destroyed. My guy won. You lost. Suck it. But it's not really that simple either. Because while if you read the footnotes and all that, you get the sense, oh, okay, he's talking about this guy and this and all that, and you get the players all, but he's a little bit less clear in the actual words on the page. And when you're less clear in the words on the page and saying, this is this guy, well, that can be just about anybody. And when it can be anybody, well, you're left with a different meaning. Yes, that one emperor tried to move the seat of government somewhere else. But the ruin, if you take it away from the meaning of just that one guy, the ruin could be anybody. The ruin could be what happens to the next guy, whom Kakemoto is celebrating. The passage of time can tend to do that. And this is another almost cliche trope of poetry in all traditions. The ruins of a civilization suggest, well, civilizations can rise and fall. One day, Manhattan might crumble into the sea. These things happen. Perspective must be kept. So instead of just being a rah rah my guy one type of poem, which Kakemoto knows where his bread is buttered. He knows that kind of reading will be good for him. Seems like he's complimenting the prudence and wisdom and greatness of his emperor. But there is that other meaning, saying that, yes, even the good emperor is subject to the natural rules of nature. The nature, kind of like the profusion of spring that we saw with Nakuta, the nature that slowly grows up over the ruins. You imagine all of these stones of these old destroyed buildings slowly being reclaimed by grass and vines and all that stuff. Yes?
When you were saying about, like before, that he knew that good emperor fall, a phrase came in my mind saying that on Batman, like, you die as a hero or you live long enough to become bad. So that kind of reminds me of that.
Yeah. Excellent Batman quote. All of this is, that's modern culture, and all of this is kind of analogous. And in crafting modern culture, very frequently, artists will go back to previous generations and start to rework very well-established themes.
When they do the rework, that's kind of like a translation to the more modern, or they kind of like do it like construct it again. Like,
well, you can treat one theme about the impermanence of human power or human culture. You can treat that a number of different ways, and it has been treated a number of different ways. And, that's fair game. You don't have to credit anyone. I seriously doubt the producers of Batman looked up the great grandkids of Kakemoto and cut them a check saying, well, okay, here's your royalties. These ideas are out there and they're in world culture, and we're all supposed to noodle them around and say, well, yeah, I don't know if that's really the same, or I don't know if that's if it's exactly that way, but it's close. And this is how ideas get rehashed. And that's, again, why we tend to read this stuff. A couple of things formally about this. Beginning that I sort of soared out my voice to do. That very archaic sound to it. That very celebrating of the heritage, the old times, the way things have always been. That establishment tone that they're showing here, the reverence, the ancestor worship, it's all kind of tied up together. Yet from sky seen Yamato did one depart. Sky seen Yamato. What does it mean to be sky seen? That's a weird little conjunction I have never seen before. Who lives in the sky? Gods! So, if you are sky seen, that means the gods can see you. Gods can see Yamato, which is the current emperor, the current empire. But that is in stark contrast to the one, whatever may have been the secret of his sage intent, and I love that throwing shade line right there, whatever he was thinking, and passed across the slopes of blue earth Nara Mountain to a land remote beyond the distant heaven, the land of Omi, where water dashes on the rocks. So the sky scene Yamato Empire, let's say, the Nara Empire, were essentially stolen and taken out of view, further from the gods. Do you want to be closer to the gods or further away from the gods? So little things like that get sort of shoved in there are significant. Formally, that sky scene Yamato, sky scene, it'd be known as what is known as a pillow word. Exactly where that comes from, I have no idea, honestly. The etymology is kind of confusing, but it's effectively an epithet, not unlike when we were reading Homer, and you see, wily Odysseus or something like that. He was always fixed with a specific adjective, effectively, telling you, okay, now what is it about? What is the primary characteristic of this noun? Is this adjective. Sky seen Yamato. Heaven blessed Yamato, essentially, is couched with that pillow word, and that is a very frequent thing that you'll see throughout these poems. And of course, the tanka at the end, still Cape Kara stands in Shiga of the gently lapping waves, changeless from of old, but it will wait in vain to see the courtiers row back. The courtiers are the people who work in the court. So now you get this tight little poem, this tight little image of, the place is nowhere now. The place is nothing. And the court is not coming back. And there is a kind of triumphalism in that tone, a kind of bragging almost. But you can see it divorced from that one single example, because this is what he's coming back to. The idea in the tanka developing what had gone on in the long poem, the choka, that the problem isn't necessarily with just that one guy. The problem is that empires all fall. Power is transitory. Worldly things are transitory. So that has a little Buddhist connection as well. And it can be seen as either congratulating the current emperor or warning him of getting a little too high and mighty himself. This too shall pass. Broad the waters stand by Shiga of the gently lapping waves. The lake is still, but how can it ever meet again, the men of long ago? So we started on this archaic triumphalism of the past, and we're ending on that same note. How can it ever meet again, the men of long ago? As if that's really plausible to begin with, but that note of something lost, that there is a reverence for the past. Is that something to be just chucked off and said, well, sure, they're dead. What can you do? You can't meet them anymore. Or is that a genuine tragedy that we are lesser than those who came before? The poem is very, I would say, uncertain as to which of those two beliefs it wants you to embrace. But being aware of the possibilities of these two different meanings, I think, gives the poem a lot more meaning, a lot more significance, and also invests you in it, because now you are being drawn in to say, the poem is saying, I'm not going to tell you how to feel, but I want you to jump in and sort of figure it out for yourself. Nature abhors a vacuum. There's a vacuum on this poem, in this page, that just opens up and sucks you in. And that's the sign of great art, quite frankly. Take a look at the poems that he writes about his wife. It's a poem of parting, an occasional poem, one of the standards of court officials of the time were to write poems of official comings and goings. So there is this kind of public format for a very personal content. So right there, it's kind of interesting. Cape Cara on the Sea of Iwami, where the vines crawl on the rocks, rockweed of the deep grows on the reefs, and sleek seaweed grows on the desolate shore. As deeply do I think of my wife, who swayed toward me in sleep like the lithe seaweed. Yet few were the nights we had slept together before we were parted, like curling vines uncurled. And so I look back, still thinking of her, with painful heart, this clench of inner flesh, but in the storm of fallen scarlet leaves on Mount Watari, crossed as on a great ship, I cannot make out the sleeves. She waves in farewell, for she, alas, is slowly hidden like the moon in its crossing between the clouds over Yagami Mountain, just as the evening sun crosses through the heavens has begun to grow. Coursing through the heavens has begun to grow. And even I, who thought I was a brave man, find the sleeves of my well-woven robe drenched with tears. And then the tanka, or envoys, or as they're called here, the quick gallop of my dapple blue steed races me to the clouds, passing far away from where my wife dwells. Oh, scarlet leaves falling on the mountains, on the autumn mountainside, stop for a while the storm your stewing makes, and I might glimpse the place where my wife dwells. This is not your average goodbye. This is not just, hey hon, I'll be back in a couple of days. There's a lot more happening here. There's a lot of nature imagery. The seaweed at the beginning is particularly notable. And that swell and surge. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to watch seaweed gather at a shore or up against a dock or something, where the water comes in and the seaweed just lifts and falls and lifts and falls. It's a time of great sadness. He's dwelling on the nature imagery, I think, because he doesn't necessarily want to deal with the personal. Well, he is parted from his wife, and like we said, it's not just, I'm running out for a drink with the boys. This is death. She dies. It's one of two poems in this collection where he's talking about how she dies. And that sense of separation, that sense of anger. I cannot make out the sleeves she waves in farewell. Sleeves in this culture have a special significance, a special symbolic meaning. The sleeves waving are a way of communicating with the recently dead. It is a spiritual medium, if you will, of communication. I cannot make out the sleeves she waves in farewell. They are not really able to communicate. She is beyond him now. And he feels this loss. For she, alas, is slowly hidden like the moon in its crossing between the clouds. The moon is a time-honored symbol of time, of change. The moon has phases. It evolves. It is never the same when you look up at it. So she is fading away like the moon. Oh, scarlet leaves falling on the autumn mountainside, stop for a while the storm your strewing makes, that I might glimpse the place where my wife dwells. There, he's not even trying to communicate with her anymore. He just wants to connect with where she might be. He just wants some last sense of contact with somebody who was lost. On the Karoo Road, the next one. On the Karoo Road, Karoo of the wing-filled sky, wing-filled, pillow word, was the village where she lived, my own dear wife, and to look at her was all I wanted in my heart, but had I always gone, there were many eyes of men. Had I gone frequently, others surely would have known. So, like branching vines after parting, we would meet again, I thought, as confident as one who rides in a great ship, and though ever yearning, kept our love secret, deep and still, as a pool walled round with rock, gleaming softly like a glinting gem. But as the coursing sun goes down the sky to darkness, or the radiant moon is lost to view within the clouds, so she who lay with me, as yielding as the seaweed to the wave, passed and was gone. As leaves of autumn pass and are no more, it was a messenger, a zuzawwood staff in hand, who brought the news. His words buzzed in my ears like a distant sound of a zuzawwood bows. Wordless, helpless, ignorant of all device, I could not bear to stand listening to the mere brute of it. And so, imagining even the 1,000th portion of my longing might somehow be assuaged, I went where she had always gone to look about, to the market of Karoo, and there I lingered listening on the hilltop of Unebe, called the Jewel Sash Mount. The birds were singing, but I could not hear the voice I knew, nor were there any passing on the Jewel Spear Road, not even one resembling her, of those that traveled there. In my helplessness, crying my beloved's name, I waved my useless sleeves. On the autumn hills, the trees are dense with yellow leaves. She has lost her way, and I must go and search for her, but do not know the mountain path. Now the yellow leaves are scattered from the boughs. I see the messenger with his Azusa wood staff, and dazed with her return to mind. Dwelling on the loss again. Clearly devastated, emotionally hollowed out. Retells a little of their early courtship, dwells on when they first knew one another. On the Karoo Road, Karoo of the wing-filled sky, was the village where she lived, my own dear wife. And I to look at her was all I wanted in my heart, but had I always gone, there were many eyes of men. That sense of, well, I don't want people talking. This small village, all those gossips going to be yabbering, saying, "Oh, look at them." That public pressure, a little shame, perhaps, a little guilt, a little embarrassment, but that conflict between the public and the private. Had I gone frequently, others surely would have known. More gossiping, more suppositions. He's trying to guess what they might be thinking. He's worried about what they might be thinking. But ultimately, that's stupid. Because what really matters is his connection to this woman, who will soon be his wife. And though ever yearning, kept our love secret, deep and still, as a pool walled round with rock, gleaming softly like a glinting gem. But as the coursing sun goes down the sky to darkness, or the radiant moon is lost to view within the clouds, so she who lay with me, as yielding as the seaweed to the wave, passed and was gone, as leaves of autumn pass and are no more. So more leaves, more seaweed, more moon, or change, transition. Think about the seaweed moving in a wave. A wave is a kind of sense of timelessness, but time as well. It's just an energy of the earth that pulses, but it never really goes anywhere. That Azusa wood, I think, is significant also. You see in the footnotes that it's what a messenger of death would generally carry. A messenger of death in perhaps a Shinto tradition. That personal pain is here juggling an awful lot of imagery to find expression. Imagery of nature. There's a profusion of nature imagery here, the seaweed, the moon, but also this cultic imagery, which is socially constructed. It is a ritual, political value opposed to a natural value. But neither one seems to be sufficient for him to find a way to talk about his feelings of loss. He's struggling between the personal and the political, and he's not really landing on a pure sense of, well, this is what I mean. I think the poem is very failed in that way, but failed not, it's an expression of the impossibility of communicating, because right after that we get these images of him trying to communicate with his wife and failing to do that. He can't communicate through poetry with you, the reader, just like he can't communicate by waving his sleeves at his wife. Death is final. Death is a divorce. Death is not just a continuum of the same thing and we're all going to go along. Death is separation. It is violent.